The bumper of the metallic silver Mercedes-Benz cracked against my lower back at 45 miles per hour on the rainy evening of April 14th, fracturing my spine into 15 jagged pieces. My body flew over the hood, my face scraping the wet asphalt of Tremont Street as my vision dissolved into a quiet, cold dark. Through the screaming wind, the last thing I heard was my husband Julian Vance speaking through his car Bluetooth speaker to his mistress, instructing her to delete the final transfer of $2 million from our joint Swiss account. I closed my eyes in the puddles of my own blood, knowing I had lost my daughter, my career, and my life to a man I had spent 10 years supporting. Then I opened my eyes. The heavy, warm scent of industrial pine cleaner and cheap coffee hit my nose, causing me to gag as my lungs desperately searched for air. Instead of rain-slicked pavement under my broken cheek, my palms were pressing against the solid, polished mahogany of a court interpreter desk. I was sitting in courtroom 4B of the Suffolk County Family Court. Beside me stood the heavy brass state seal of Massachusetts, casting a metallic shadow across the defense table where my legal counsel should have been sitting. Instead, my seat at that table was completely empty, a testament to how thoroughly Julian had stripped me of representation by draining my personal bank accounts. I looked down at my hands. They were unscarred, smooth, and trembling with a burst of frantic adrenaline. On my left wrist was my cheap silver watch, its face indicating that it was precisely 10 past 2 in the afternoon on October 12th, exactly 3 years before my death. This was the afternoon of my final custody hearing for my 6-year-old daughter Lily. In my past life, this was the afternoon my entire world fell apart. My chest tightened with the phantom memory of metal shattering my ribs, a sharp, cold throb radiating through my lower spine where the bumper of the Mercedes had crushed me. My teeth chattered, my throat parched as I recognized the heavy, slow ticking of the courtroom clock. I looked across the center aisle of the room. There sat Julian. His tailored gray charcoal suit was pristine, his blonde hair swept back with expensive pomade, and his face displayed the perfect mask of a grieving, responsible father. Sitting directly next to him was Sharon Brooks, his elite matrimonial trial lawyer who was also secretly sleeping with him. Sharon was busy highlighting a series of falsified financial ledgers, her long manicured red nails tapping rhythmically against the heavy cardstock. They were both smiling, sharing a brief, whispery laugh that made my stomach churn with a sudden wave of acid. Behind them, sitting on the polished spectator benches, was a quiet, broad-shouldered man in a navy wool coat. He was sitting completely alone, scribbling notes in a small black leather journal with an old-fashioned fountain pen. His sharp gray eyes caught mine for a split second, and my heart skipped a beat as I recognized him. His name was Noah Vance. In my previous life, Noah had appeared in the news 2 years after my custody trial, identified as the chief investigator for the Office of Professional Responsibility, who had busted a multi-million-dollar municipal judicial bribery ring. By then it was too late for me. My appeals had been exhausted, my daughter was already hidden away in a boarding school in Geneva, and I was working 12-hour shifts at a dry cleaning facility just to pay my back taxes. Noah was currently disguised as a random legal observer, monitoring the corrupt transactions flowing through this very family court. Seeing him sitting there so early in this timeline ignited a cold, steady spark of hope inside my chest. Our eyes disconnected as the heavy double doors at the front of the courtroom swung open. In stepped Hector Delgado, a prominent shipping tycoon from the port of Cartagena, Colombia. Julian had flew Delgado in specifically to testify that I had allegedly pocketed illegal cash stipends from Vance Logistics during my temporary seasonal work as their translation liaison in Bogota. Delgado was wearing an oversized linen blazer, his face weathered, carrying himself with the untouchable arrogance of a foreign billionaire. Beside Delgado walked Victor Croft, a state-certified court interpreter hired by Julian's team at a premium rate. In my past life, I trusted Croft's official certification, believing that the court's neutral transcript would protect the truth of Delgado's Spanish statements. I had stood by silently as Croft subtly altered Delgado's actual words during translation, changing key phrases to make it seem as though I had actively embezzled company assets and bought narcotics overseas. When I had tried to object to the translation as a native speaker, the judge, who was secretly on Julian's payroll, threatened to have me detained for disrupting the administration of justice. The phantom pain in my back flared up again, hot and blinding, reminding me of what silence would cost me this time. I closed my fists tightly, the sharp pain of my fingernails digging into my palms grounding me in the reality of the present. The presiding judge, Albert Harrison, tapped his heavy gavel against the sounding block, the wooden crack echoing through the high-ceilinged room. He did not look at me, his eyes remained fixed on Julian with a warm, professional familiarity. The judge cleared his throat and declared that we would resume the direct examination of the petitioning party's primary international witness. Sharon Brooks stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive blazer, her heels clicking loudly against the linoleum floor as she approached the podium. She nodded toward Hector Delgado, who was sworn in by the bailiff, and then pointedly glanced back at me with a smirk of absolute triumph. "Mr. Delgado," Sharon began, her voice carrying the practiced, patronizing warmth of an attorney who believed she had already won. "Can you please describe for the court the specific nature of your business interactions with Clara Mitchell during her time managing logistics translation in Bogota?" Victor Croft stepped up to the translator microphone, clearing his throat as Delgado began to speak in rapid, localized Bogota dialect Spanish. Delgado gestured widely with his hands as he spoke, his tone casual, almost bored. "Clara siempre estuvo al tanto de las facturas falsas que usábamos para el desvío de los fondos de Vance Logistics, y ella firmaba los recibos directamente," he said, his eyes scanning the back wall of the courtroom. Croft immediately stepped close to his microphone, his translation dripping with professional gravity. Croft stated to the court that Ms. Mitchell was fully aware of all illicit corporate invoice processing and directly authorized the withdrawal of international corporate assets for her personal use, matching the signatures on the exhibits. My hand tightened around the black pen on my desk. Croft had deliberately omitted the word fake regarding the invoices, and inserted the word personal use to align perfectly with Julian's embezzlement narrative. In my previous life, this was where I had frozen, terrified of the judge's threats, letting Croft's corrupt transcription stand as the absolute official truth. But I had spent the 3 years before my death translating complex, white-collar crime transcripts for the Federal Defense Bar, memorizing the precise, rigid legal framework of the State Licensing Board. I knew exactly where the boundaries of the courtroom procedure lay. I did not scream, I did not shout or break down in tears. I stood up slowly, keeping my spine perfectly straight, channeling the cold, absolute focus of a woman who had already died once. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet courtroom like a scalpel. "As an active, state-certified officer of the court registered under license number 4789, I am raising a formal objection to the interpreter's translation of the witness's statement under the Massachusetts Code of Professional Responsibility for Court Interpreters, Section 3. Judge Harrison frowned deeply, his thick eyebrows knitting together in immediate annoyance as he banged his gavel. "Sit down, Miss Mitchell. You are representing yourself, but you are not permitted to interrupt the witness examination or the state-certified translator. This is your final warning." I kept my eyes fixed directly on the court reporter, who was actively typing on her stenography machine. If I sat down, the fake translation would be preserved forever. "The court interpreter, Victor Croft, has committed a critical translation omission and a structural modification of the witness' actual statement," I continued, speaking with deliberate, mechanical speed so the stenographer could record every word. "The witness used the specific Spanish term facturas falsas, which translates directly to fraudulent or fake invoices, not corporate invoices. Furthermore, the witness did not state she authorized assets for personal use. He stated ella firmaba los recibos, meaning she merely signed the receipts, which was her basic clerical duty as a translator." A tense, dead silence fell over the entire courtroom. Sharon Brooks turned around to glare at me, her eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and sudden irritation. Julian's jaw tightened, his fingers clenching the edge of the defense table as he shot a warning look toward Croft. Judge Harrison's face turned a deep, dark red. "Miss Mitchell, this is highly inappropriate. Mr. Croft is a highly respected court interpreter. I will not have this proceeding hijacked by your desperate legal acrobatics." "With all due respect, Your Honor," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly cold, steady, and loud. "If this court refuses to permit a verification audit of a certified interpreter's contested translation, it constitutes a structural due process violation under federal law, rendering any subsequent custody order immediately voidable on appeal. Furthermore, the court reporter's audio recording is currently active, preserving both the original Spanish and my objection for appellate review by the State Board." Behind me in the second row, I heard the faint, metallic click of a fountain pen cap being closed. Noah Vance was watching me, a sharp, analyzing glint in his gray eyes, his notebook resting flat on his knee. He knew exactly what I was doing. Judge Harrison glanced down at his desk clerk, his expression shifting from anger to a brief flicker of genuine anxiety. He knew that if he ran over a formal, recorded objection regarding language access with federal marshals looking into judicial standards, his career would be in immediate jeopardy. "Mr. Croft," Judge Harrison muttered, his voice dropping an octave as he pointed his finger at the interpreter. "Is there any validity to the respondent's linguistic correction?" Croft's forehead was suddenly wet with perspiration. He wiped his face with a silk handkerchief, his eyes darting frantically between Julian and the judge. "I may have simplified the terminology for the sake of speed, Your Honor. The respondent's translation is technically literal." I apologize to the court. "It is not merely literal, it is the only accurate legal representation of the statement," I said, sitting back down slowly. "I request that the court reporter strike the previous English translation and record my verified correction on the official record." "Do so," Judge Harrison grumbled, waving his hand dismissively. "Let the record reflect the corrected translation. Please proceed with the examination, counsel." Sharon Brooks looked visibly shaken. Her carefully constructed rhythm had been broken, her initial opening trap completely dismantled. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her footing as she looked back at her notes. "Let us transition to the joint bank accounts," Sharon said, her voice carrying a nervous edge. "Mr. Delgado, in your shipping operations, did you ever receive directly signed wire authorizations from Clara Mitchell to transfer funds to accounts located in the canton of Zurich?" This was the trap. In my past life, this was the point where Julian had introduced a signed printed paper showing a bank transfer of $100,000, bearing my forged signature, which Delgado claimed he saw me sign. But as I looked at Sharon, I noticed a sudden, deep tremor in her fingers as she reached into her litigation bag. She didn't pull out a paper. Instead, she pulled out a flash drive. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was different. This was not how the previous custody trial had unfolded. In my previous life, Julian had relied solely on the paper document because my silence was guaranteed. But my sudden resistance had forced them to accelerate their timeline, shifting their strategy on the spot. "Your Honor," Sharon announced, her voice rising with a cold, desperate confidence. "In light of the respondent's sudden disputes regarding documentation, we submit into evidence Petitioner's Exhibit 12B, a digital audio recording recovered from Avance Logistics' corporate server, containing an explicit conversation between Ms. Mitchell and a third-party commercial broker, wherein she agrees to surrender custody of Lily in exchange for a confidential cash payment." A cold, heavy numbness crawled up my neck. I looked at Julian. He was smiling, a wicked reptilian curve of his mouth that made me feel like I was staring directly into the headlights of the silver Mercedes again. I had never in my life agreed to sell custody of my child. I had spent nights weeping in the hospital after a forced miscarriage, begging Julian to let me keep our family together. This recording was a fabricated, highly polished AI voice clone or a meticulously chopped audio edit made from my old raw recordings. Julian was a tech-heavy logistics CEO. He had access to specialized voice processing software. This was the false low. This was the moment where my future knowledge failed me, leaving me standing naked and exposed at the edge of a deep cliff. The court clerk took the flash drive from Sharon, inserting it into the media system. Within seconds, the high-fidelity speakers of the courtroom crackled to life. My own voice echoed through the high-ceilinged room, sounding horribly clear, tired, and desperate. "If Julian pays the $2 million into the Zurich account, I will leave Boston and never come back for Lily," my voice said, the cadence matching my pattern perfectly, down to the brief catch in my throat. "I just want the money. She is too much of a burden for my career." The courtroom fell into an icy, horrified silence. The courtroom deputy looked at me with open disgust. The guardian ad litem, who was sitting near the back, rubbed her temples and let out a soft sigh of disappointment. I felt the physical weight of their collective judgment, a suffocating, heavy pressure that made it difficult to expand my lungs. The phantom sensation of blood dripping down my forehead returned, thick and warm, clouding my vision with memory. "This tape is a complete and absolute fabrication," I said, but my voice was barely a whisper. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to grip the wooden edge of the defense table to keep from collapsing. "Is it Ms. Mitchell?" Sharon Brooks asked, stepping closer to me, her voice booming with moral outrage. This recording was extracted by a licensed digital forensics expert from a secure corporate server under oath. The voice print is a 99% match to your vocal frequency. Your own words reveal your true character. You are not a victim, you are a blackmailer. Judge Harrison looked down at me from his elevated bench, his expression completely devoid of mercy. Do you have any forensic evidence to counter this recording right now, Ms. Mitchell? If not, I am prepared to suspend your visitation rights immediately and grant sole physical and legal custody to the father, with no right of geographic restriction. This was it. If the custody was granted with no geographic restriction, Julian would immediately boarding school Lily in Geneva tonight, just as he did in my past life. I would never see her again, and my 3 years of suffering would be repeated. My throat closed up, my chest was burning. The logic of my future knowledge was fracturing beneath my feet. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds, blocking out the hostile glares of the lawyers, the cold face of the judge, and the panic screaming in my head. I focused entirely on my professional training. I had spent thousands of hours analyzing raw audio recordings of state-level wiretaps for criminal trials. I knew what audio artifacts looked like. I knew how digital compression operated when a real voice was merged with synthetic generation. Your Honor, I said, opening my eyes. My voice had lost all its trembling, it was completely lethally flat. I request a live linguistic and physical audio analysis of the submitted media file on the court's official record, utilizing the native digital playback software installed on the court's computer. Judge Harrison laughed dryly. This is not a scientific lab, Ms. Mitchell. We do not perform forensic audio analysis on the fly. The tape has been authenticated by the petitioner's expert. I am not asking for a lab, I said, standing up and stepping toward the court reporter's screen, pointing directly to the digital wave file displayed on the media system. I am exercising my Writer Massachusetts Rules of Evidence Article 7, Rule 701, as a lay witness testifying to my own voice, and as a native linguist identifying linguistic anomalies. I pointed to the display, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room where Noah Vance was watching, his pen poised. If the court zooms in on the digital wave signature of the third sentence, between seconds 14 and 16, you will observe a total flatline noise gate floor. I explained, my tone carrying the quiet, technical confidence of a professional expert witness. Real voices recorded in a corporate server environment contain a constant baseline of environmental frequency, especially around 60 Hz from corporate ventilation systems. The absolute digital silence between those syllables is the distinct mathematical signature of an audio slice and stitch or an AI vocal generator lacking natural breathing artifacts. I paused, turning my head slightly toward the translation bench where Victor Croft was sitting. Furthermore, I continued, my voice cold and sharp. The voice on the recording pronounced the word Zurich with an uncharacteristic voiceless palatal alveolar sibilant, which is highly consistent with an audio generation algorithm utilizing a standardized British phonetic dataset. I have lived in New England my entire life. My dialectal phonemes utilize a voiced alveolar sibilant for the letter Z. I have never in my life pronounced Zurich with an S sound. A heavy murmur swept through the back of the courtroom. The court reporter stared at the screen, her eyes narrowing as she zoomed in on the audio waves. She glanced up at the judge and nodded slowly. She is correct, Your Honor. The noise gate floor between those specific seconds is an absolute zero line. Our court system recording equipment normally captures a baseline frequency of 34 decibels of background hum. That section of the audio is completely artificial. Sharon Brooks's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks until her makeup looked like plaster. She scrambled to grab her papers from the podium, her hands shaking. This is just lay observation, Your Honor. Sharon protested, her voice cracking slightly. We require a full continuance to allow our expert to prepare a rebuttal. No continuance, a voice suddenly boomed from the back of the room. Everyone in the courtroom turned around. Noah Vance was standing up. He slipped his black leather notebook into his pocket, took off his wool coat, and walked calmly down the center aisle, pulling a thick silver badge and an official folder from his breast pocket. He stepped through the swinging bar door of the court, presenting the badge directly to the bailiff. Noah Vance, Senior Special Investigator for the Office of Professional Responsibility and the Federal Bureau of Joint Judicial Task Forces, he announced, his voice smooth, commanding, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Your Honor, our office has been executing a federal wire interception warrant on Vance Logistics communication systems for the past 45 days under a broader investigation into judicial bribery and corporate customs fraud. Julian stood up so quickly his heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the floor, screeching like metal on glass. "What the hell is the meaning of this?" Julian shouted, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fury. "This is a private family matter." "Quiet," the bailiff barked, stepping close to Julian with his hand resting firmly on his service weapon. Noah Vance didn't even look at Julian. He kept his steady gray eyes on Judge Harrison, who was now clutching his chest, his face the color of wet cement. "I have here a signed federal warrant issued 3 hours ago by the Federal District Court of Massachusetts," Noah Vance said, laying a thick packet of blue-bound legal documents on the clerk's desk. "We have intercept transcripts showing that at 9 o'clock last night, attorney Sharon Brooks sent a series of encrypted files containing vocal samples of Clara Mitchell to a digital developer located in Cluj, Romania. We also have financial logs showing a payment of $15,000 from Vance Logistics to that same developer's account, completed this morning." Noah turned around, pointing his pen toward Victor Croft, who had slumped so low in his chair, he looked like a deflated balloon. "We also have recordings of Julian Vance arranging a cash transfer of $50,000 to a shell corporation registered to intruder Victor Croft's brother, in exchange for Croft's agreement to systematically misinterpret the Spanish testimony of Mr. Delgado today," Noah added. My hands finally stopped shaking. The phantom cold of my past life car crash dissolved entirely, replaced by the warm, thick heat of a real, physical triumph. I stood tall, watching as Julian's expensive facade cracked, his jaw trembling, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked exits of the courtroom. "Julian Vance, Sharon Brooks and Victor Croft," Noah Vance declared, his voice ringing through the quiet courtroom. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal witness tampering, and judicial corruption under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." Before Julian could take a step, the side doors of courtroom 4B swung open. 3 federal marshals dressed in dark blue tactical gear entered the room, handcuffs jingling loudly against their utility belts. They moved quickly and efficiently, walking past me without a second glance. The first marshal gripped Julian's wrist, twisting it behind his back with a loud, mechanical click of the steel cuffs. Julian didn't shout this time. His head fell forward, a soft, pathetic sob escaping his lips as his $5,000 suit was creased by the rough hands of the law. The second marshal handcuffed Sharon Brooks, who had collapsed onto her litigation bag, weeping silently as her red fingernails clawed at the defense table. Victor Croft was led out in handcuffs as well, his head bowed, his official court interpreter badge hanging loosely from his neck, soon to be stripped of his license and his freedom forever. Judge Harrison sat motionless behind his elevated bench, his hand trembling so badly he couldn't hold his pen. Noah Vance looked up at him with a cold, piercing glare that made the corrupt judge swallow hard, realizing his own name would be on the next indictment papers. The bailiff stepped up, holding Lily by her hand as she came out of the child services room behind the bench. Lily was wearing her soft yellow sweater, her curly hair bouncy as she ran directly toward me, her small arms reaching out for my waist. "Mommy?" Lily cried, wrapping her arms tightly around my legs, her small head pressing against my ribs. I fell to my knees, burying my face in the sweet, familiar smell of her lavender shampoo. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, my chest expanded with deep, warm, painless air. The cold rain of my past life-death was gone, washed away by the bright, clean afternoon sun shining through the tall glass windows of the courtroom. I carried my daughter in my arms, standing tall as I walked past the broken remnants of Julian Vance's empire. I was no longer a shadow trapped in a cycle of pain. I was finally entirely free. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung shut behind me, the loud click of the brass latch sealing off the chaos inside. We walked down the long, cold marble corridor of the family courthouse. The click of my heels on the white stone was loud and rhythmic, no longer the erratic scuffle of a panicked mother, but the steady march of a victor. Lily resting her warm head on my shoulder felt like an anchor, pulling me away from the terrifying abyss of my past life and into a concrete, bright reality. Before we reached the elevators, a tall, imposing figure stepped out of the shadow of the tall limestone pillars near the security checkpoint. It was Noah Vance, his navy blue wool coat draped over his arm, his fingers lightly gripping the leather straps of a heavy litigation bag. His face was entirely unreadable, but there was a quiet, deep respect in the way he stood, waiting for me to approach. "Ms. Mitchell," Noah said, his voice dropping to a low, confidential pitch that didn't carry across the busy corridor. "We have transport vehicles waiting for you and your daughter at the side exit of the building. My federal colleagues are processing Julian and Miss Brooks as we speak, but our work is far from over." I paused, adjusting my grip on Lily, who was yawning softly as the stress of the afternoon began to catch up to her. I knew the rules of federal prosecutions. An arrest was only a preliminary stage in a long, grueling battle against a wealthy corporate machine. "They will apply for an emergency bail hearing before the evening docket closes," I noted, my voice sounding incredibly calm even to myself. "Julian has liquid reserves in 3 offshore entities that your current wire interceptions might not have frozen yet. If he gets out on a signature bond, he will be on a chartered flight to the Caribbean before midnight." Noah raised his eyebrows, a brief, surprised smile twitching at the corner of his lips before his face returned to its usual analytical stillness. "You are remarkably well informed for a domestic litigant, Ms. Mitchell. It seems my assessment of your administrative intelligence was understated. But you are correct, which is why I need you to accompany me to the federal building in Government Center immediately." "Why do you need me?" I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on his. "Your team has the wire intercepts, you have the recordings." "Because we have a mountain of raw, encrypted Panamanian transit data that we seized from Vance Logistics' Boston terminal early this morning," Noah explained, stepping closer so our voices were barely a whisper. "Our linguists are familiar with standard European Spanish, but they do not understand the localized commercial maritime dialect used by Julian's shell company operators in Cartagena. You spent 3 years managing those exact shipping logs. You are the only independent officer of the court who can translate these files with enough technical precision to secure an immediate, permanent federal asset freeze warrant before their attorneys can file for emergency bail." My heart surged with a dark, calculated satisfaction. In my previous life, those very shipping logs had been used as a tool to frame me, transforming me into a pariah in the eyes of the law. This time those identical documents would serve as the heavy iron chains that would lock Julian's cell door for the rest of his natural life. "I will assist you under one condition," I said, looking Noah dead in his eyes. "I want my daughter in the adjacent federal child care facility, guarded by a dedicated deputy marshal. I want written confirmation from the regional prosecutor that my permanent custody of Lily is formally supported by the federal government under the Victim and Witness Protection Act." "Consider it done," Noah replied, giving a single firm nod. "The papers are already being drafted by our office." 20 minutes later, we were inside a high-security office on the 11th floor of the John F. Kennedy Federal Building. The room smelled of hot circuit boards, cardboard archive boxes, and cold black coffee. Through the thick bulletproof glass, I could see the gray, chilly waters of the Boston Harbor, the container cranes of the shipping terminals rising like mechanical monsters in the distant autumn mist. Lily was safely coloring in a playroom 2 doors down, supervised by a kind female marshal who had checked the room for physical safety hazards. Noah sat across from me at a long metal table, slide-mounting a heavy government laptop toward me. The screen was covered in lines of complex, raw hexadecimal code and broken directories retrieved from a hidden hard drive in Julian's corporate desk. "Our forensic teams pulled these yesterday from Julian's terminal," Noah said, pointing to a highlighted sequence of compressed directories. "These are the audio notes and real-time ledger entries from the shell entity known as Oro Azul S.A. It is a shipping facade. We believe they have been moving cash bribes to port inspectors disguised as standard diesel maintenance invoices. The files are heavily laced with Colombian coastal slang. Can you decrypt the real meanings?" I stared at the blinking screen. My fingers felt cool, my mind moving with a mechanical speed that belonged to a professional translator at the top of her game. I didn't even need to consult a reference dictionary. My memory of these files was burnt into my mind from the long, agonizing nights in my past life when I had desperately tried to prove my own innocence to a skeptical police force. "Open the folder marked Transactions Additionales," I said, my voice cold and focused. "Look at row 47. The term they use is fleets envenenados, which Croft previously translated as damaged cargo shipping rates. What does it actually mean? Noah asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. It is a specialized contraband term used by the smuggling syndicates in Barranquilla, I explained, typing the search parameters directly into the database on his screen. It means poisoned freight. It represents containers containing dual-bottom modifications used for smuggling unregistered heavy cash assets into the country. I scrolled down further, entering a nested command that I knew by heart. Look at these transactional transfers to an offshore bank in Nassau under the account name Albatross Marine. Croft translated those payments as standard consulting fees. In reality, Albatross Marine is the private, unregistered holdings company owned entirely by the presiding family court judge, Albert Harrison. Noah's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, staring at the financial records appearing on his screen as the database verified the offshore tracking routes I had manually input. The routing numbers matched Harrison's secret corporate profile, which Noah's office had been trying to identify for over 18 months. My God, Noah muttered, running his hand through his short, sandy hair. You've just handed us the absolute financial nexus between Julian's company and the family court judge. This isn't just an administrative corruption case anymore. This is a level 1 federal racketeering conspiracy that goes straight to the state judicial council. This is why they needed me silenced, I said quietly, looking down at my hands. In my past life, Julian knew that my linguistic skills would make me a major liability if I ever looked too closely at his books. That is why he fabricated the mental illness records and bought off my attorney. He didn't just want custody of Lily. He wanted to destroy my legal credibility so that if I ever tried to report these numbers, the authorities would write me off as a delusional, bitter ex-wife. The door to the office flew open, and a junior investigator in an untucked dress shirt stepped inside, looking flushed with a sudden, anxious urgency. Noah, we have a massive problem, the investigator said, catching his breath. Julian Vance's corporate lawyers just filed a writ of habeas corpus along with an emergency asset petition. They found a friendly, corrupt judge in the county chancery court, who is prepared to sign an order releasing Julian's commercial accounts from the state-level holds within the next 30 minutes. If that order goes through, Julian will have the financial leverage to transfer his liquid cash out of our reach. A cold, calculating smirk appeared on my face. I stood up, stepping directly next to the investigator's terminal, pointing at the blinking ledger data. They can't release those accounts if those specific funds are tied directly to an ongoing Department of Homeland Security maritime smuggling case, I said, my voice dripping with cold, clinical logic. Under federal seizure laws, specifically Section 9081, any financial account that has been actively linked to foreign smuggling activities or container tampering is subject to an immediate administrative freeze that overrides any state-level judicial chancery order. But we don't have Delgado's signature matching the specific shipping container serials yet, Noah said, shaking his head with frustration. Our teams have Delgado in custody downstairs, but his lawyers are refusing to let him speak. Delgado will speak if he realizes his own daughter's name is listed on these files, I said, leaning over the laptop, highlighting a specific subfolder titled Contritos Escalares. What do you mean? Noah asked. In his Colombian operations, Delgado used Julian's company to purchase 2 luxury residential properties in Back Bay under his daughter's name, financed entirely by Julian's fake invoices, I explained, pointing to the transfer dates. Delgado believes his family is safe because the properties are registered under a third-party trust. But my translations of these Panamanian escrow files link his daughter directly to the money laundering scheme. In Massachusetts, laundering money through residential real estate using foreign proceeds is a separate 20-year felony under state law. I looked at Noah, my eyes bright with a sharp, lethal determination. Take me down to Delgado's interrogation room. Let me be the translator for his interview. I will translate his rights and show him his daughter's signature on these trust files in his native Spanish. I guarantee he will sign a full federal cooperation agreement in 5 minutes. Noah stared at me for several long seconds, his chest rising and falling as he processed the sheer scale of the strategy I had presented. He picked up his federal credentials, clipping them to his belt. Get our legal representative down to room 3, Noah ordered his assistant, his voice echoing with absolute authority. We are conducting a foreign deposition immediately. 3 minutes later, I was walking into interrogation room 3. The room was tiny, windowless, and illuminated by a harsh, sterile overhead tube light that hummed with a quiet, annoying frequency. Hector Delgado sat at the table, his linen blazer rumpled, his hands locked in shiny steel handcuffs attached to a heavy bolt on the floor. His lawyer, an expensive, slick-faced defense attorney from New York, sat beside him, smelling of expensive cologne and cheap cologne. Delgado looked up as I entered, his eyes widening with immediate, venomous anger. "What is this garbage?" Delgo shouted in Spanish, glaring at Noah. "Why are you bringing this woman in here? She has nothing to do with my company. Tell your client that I am his official, federal court-appointed translator for this proceeding," I said in cold, perfectly fluent Spanish before the defense attorney could even open his mouth. Under federal grand jury regulations, all Spanish communication will be transcribed and translated for the grand jury record by me, under oath. Delgado sneered, leaning forward in his chair until the metal links of his cuffs rattled. "You think you have some power here, girl? You are just a clerk. My attorneys will have this whole case dismissed by tomorrow morning." "No, they won't," I replied, sitting down at the table and opening the physical manila folder Noah had handed me. I pulled out a series of translated banking records, laying them flat on the steel surface directly in front of Delgado. I pointed to a signature at the bottom of a transfer ledger from an offshore account in Grand Cayman. "Your daughter, Isabella Delgado, is currently enrolled at Boston University," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and utterly relentless. "These bank records show that her $300,000 brownstone apartment in Boston was purchased using wire transfers directly from Julian Vance's container logistics fund, marked as commercial cargo rebates." Delgado's face froze. The arrogant smirk on his face dissolved, his dark skin turning a sickly, ash-gray as he stared at the financial document bearing his daughter's name. "This constitutes a direct violation of federal bank fraud laws," I continued, my Spanish remaining crystal clear and totally unemotional. "The U.S. attorney has already signed an order to freeze your daughter's local accounts. By tomorrow morning, your daughter will be arrested on conspiracy charges for receiving stolen foreign corporate funds, her visa will be revoked, and she will be detained in a federal holding facility in Plymouth." "No," Delgado gasped, his hands trembling violently as he tried to grab the paper, his cuffs clattering loudly against the steel table. "She knew nothing about this. She has nothing to do with my business." "Then you must sign the cooperation agreement immediately," I said, pushing the blue pen toward his shaking fingers. "If you state on the record that Julian Vance bought off your testimony to commit perjury in family court, and if you provide the decryption key to the remaining Panama accounts, the U.S. Attorney's Office will grant your daughter full immunity from prosecution." Delgado's defense attorney tried to step in, grabbing his client's arm. "Hector, don't say another word. Let me negotiate with the prosecutors." "There is nothing to negotiate," Delgado whispered, his voice cracking with absolute defeat. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a deep, primeval terror of a father who realized he was completely cornered by a predator he had foolishly underestimated. "Where do I sign?" Delgado asked, his eyes wet with tears. Noah Vance stepped forward, slide-mounting the cooperation contract directly in front of Delgado. Within 90 seconds, Delgado's trembling hand had scribbled his signature across the bottom of the federal cooperation agreement, forever destroying any chance Julian Vance had of securing bail, freedom, or custody. 2 hours later, Noah and I stood in the glass-walled observation lounge overlooking the city harbor. The night had finally fallen, and the bright lights of Boston's skyscrapers cast a shimmering, neon-colored reflection across the cold, dark water. Through the glass doors, I could see Lily asleep on a small, soft leather sofa in Noah's private office, a fuzzy blue blanket pulled up to her chin. "We just got word from the magistrate," Noah said quietly, stepping up to my side, carrying 2 cardboard cups of hot tea. "Julian Vance's bail has been denied completely under the pre-trial detention provisions for international flight risks. The grand jury indictments will be formally unsealed at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." "What about the family court judge?" I asked, taking a small sip of the warm, soothing tea. "Albert Harrison has been suspended by the Judicial Commission pending an emergency review," Noah replied, a look of profound satisfaction in his eyes. "He is currently being questioned by the FBI regarding his hidden Cayman accounts. Every single order Harrison signed in the last 5 years is being reviewed, which means your past life rulings have been officially, permanently voided on the record." I closed my eyes for a long moment, letting those words settle deep into my mind. The heavy, dark phantom pain in my lower back, which had haunted me since the moment of my rebirth, was completely gone. I was no longer a terrified woman fleeing from a killer's Mercedes on a rainy night. I was a mother who had systematically dissected her enemies using the absolute force of her intelligence, her courage, and her professional perfection. I looked at the calm, bright skyline of the city, realizing that the cold, dark winter that had once crushed me had been permanently replaced by a warm, limitless spring of new beginnings. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.